Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity to speak on this package of bills, and I'd like to talk about all the bills, although I will focus on one particular bill in my remarks.
Okay, thank you. Please address
Sure.
the whole package as well. Thank you.
I appreciate a lot of the comments that have been made on both sides of the aisle, and I certainly agree with the colleague who said that we should not bring disgrace to the body, to the House or the Senate, to the legislature in general by anything that we say. I think that's right. But I want to remind everybody that actions speak louder than words, and the legislation we are voting on tonight is an embarrassment to this body. The actions that we are going to take tonight are far more embarrassing than anything we could say on this House floor. Why is that? Well, where do I begin? There's so much here to work with and so little time that I'm going to focus on one particular piece of the legislation. That's Senate Bill 414. That's the income tax rollback that apparently was the price of getting the votes that were necessary to push this dreadful package through. Mr. Speaker, this bill is really, it's the ugly, logical conclusion of what term limits has brought to the state capitol. It's a tax cut that is targeted at the very wealthiest people in our state to provide a fig leaf for what we're doing to everybody else. And the worst part about Senate Bill 414 and the way it's being incorporated in this package is that it's a fiscal time bomb. And I don't think very many, if anybody on this floor, is aware of just how explosive this is likely to be. And I'm going to try to illustrate that by talking a little bit about what our friends in the House Fiscal Agency have found when they analyzed this legislation. Now, the rollback provisions in here are designed to lower the income tax rate beginning in 2019 in any year when the general fund grows by more than the rate of inflation. That's the policy. Sounds harmless enough. Well, I just happen to have a document in front of me here that shows over the last 30 years what the general fund has done in terms of growing above and below the rate of inflation. And I'm just going to read numbers. I'm going to go in no particular order. In 1979, 1980, 1981, the general fund shrank. We all remember, well, some of those of us who are old enough like me, remember how bad the economy was in Michigan and everywhere else in 1980 and 81, and the general fund shrank by almost 12%, 11.8%. Well, 2 years later, it grew by 7%. And then the year after that, it grew by 9.4%. That was in 1983-84 fiscal year. Then it grew by 4.1%. Then it shrank by 0.7%, by 0.3%, up and down and up and down. And I'm not going to mention Gumby. I'm not going to mention any cartoon character. But this reminds me of an amusement park, and it would be funny if it weren't so scary. Because what we're doing here is locking into law a policy that will shrink the general fund in any year when the revenues to the general fund go up by more than the rate of inflation. But the following year, those revenues can crater. We can have a significant drop, and yet we'll be continuing to lock in that cut in the income tax. Now, some people are sitting in this room going, yes, exactly, that's what I want. Be careful what you wish for. Because what this legislation will do is what we've done to our local governments in this state through the Headley Amendment, where we have locked in dramatic reductions in our local government's ability to raise revenue, regardless of what happens to the economy. And now we have local governments teetering on the brink of insolvency. That is what we are doing in this legislation. The state of Colorado enacted something very similar through a constitutional amendment called the Taxpayer Bill of Rights. They were shrinking revenue every time their revenues grew. They were shrinking their overall general fund every time they grew above inflation. It got so bad that the people voted to pause the taxpayer Bill of Rights because they couldn't educate their children under that policy. That is what we're doing here tonight, and it is embarrassing, and it is not something we should be doing with a few minutes' notice and no hearings and no discussion. The House Fiscal Agency estimates that if this income tax rollback had been in place this year, the general fund would have been cut by $680 million. And the problem is there's no floor. That's $680 million in year one. And if there's another growth in revenue above inflation, there's another cut. Well, you don't have to have too many years in a row like that before the general fund is dramatically depleted. The income tax has been cut so far that we're reaching the point where we could actually even begin to affect the school aid fund. Because remember, the first point and a half, I think it is, of the income tax goes to the school aid fund. So lest you think that we're not impacting schools here, at some point we will, and certainly to the extent that we are funding community colleges and higher ed out of the general fund, we're going to be hammering them in year one. So the important thing to focus on here is this is irresponsible legislation, this is a fiscal time bomb, and this is a massive giveaway to the wealthiest people in our state. Mention was made earlier that we're going to help working families with $100 a year. Well, I think a number of you have probably seen the charts that my office has produced where we analyzed exactly how much we're doing here to help working families versus the richest 1%. The richest 1% on average would get a $3,000 tax cut in a single year in the first year this legislation comes into effect. $3,000 versus $100. Whose side are you on? Who are you working for? It raises some serious questions. And I think the people of Michigan are justified in raising some serious doubts. The last thing I'm going to say is that, I don't think this legislation is going anywhere. I don't think this is going to be the final product, and I certainly hope that when we are done with this exercise, we can get back to doing what we ought to be doing, which is negotiating in good faith a reasonable package that raises revenue, that finds efficiencies wherever they are really there, and allows us to actually do what the people sent us here to do, which is to provide for the public good, to do the things the private sector cannot do to allow us to be secure, to be empowered, and to prosper, and to take care of everyone who is in the weakest position to take care of themselves. So, colleagues, I urge all of you to vote no on this package, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak.